Okay, so basically you imagine water going into this. Obviously the bottom will start filling up first, and then eventually it'll get to the top, right? Now our job is to draw a graph of how deep the water gets over time. Now this example, can you turn around properly please, Humera? This example is actually quite difficult. I'm going to do this one first, okay? So what would happen now? Well, I'll just set up some axes. I think it would go like this. The water goes to the bottom, kind of filling. And then suddenly, the bottom is completely filled. Then the water starts going into the top. Now anybody who's ever been squirted in the face when they were filling a water bottle up and they didn't realise it was getting to the top will know that when the water starts filling the top, because the top is not as thick as the bottom, like that's thinner than that, suddenly the water will start filling faster, which is why sometimes you get squirted in the face. So I think this graph is a realistic reflection of what's happening. Okay? So in other words, this is steeper than that, reflecting the fact that it's the second stage, so this is time and this is depth, reflecting the fact that it's the second stage that is faster. Okay, so let's say 2 grid squares was a second. In that 1 second it goes from that deep to that deep, whereas in this 1 second it goes from that deep to that deep. So the second section is much faster. Now that one's quite a straightforward example, but, are you right there, Natalie?
Yeah.
But you've got to get these things right. There are a couple of things to be careful about. I'll just write these things down. First thing you've got to be careful about is straight lines versus curves. My graph is completely straight there, and then when I wanted to make it steeper, I had this little kink, and then suddenly it got steeper. Sometimes you do not want to do that. Sometimes you want to have a curve, like you want to make it gradually get steeper. Okay? Another thing you need to be careful about is obviously the steepness. We've discussed that. And the third thing is, I'll discuss in a second, section lengths on a horizontal and vertical axis. You've got no idea what that means at the moment. I'll explain it in a second. Come on, let's just go through the things. Is everyone satisfied that I was correct about my steepness? Okay? Is everyone satisfied that I was correct about my use of straight lines? Or does anyone have a gut feeling that I should have used curves? Anybody think I should have used curves? Okay, well we'll see why you're correct in a second. Now, I'm now going to explain this third thing to check. It seems to me from this diagram that the bottom section is just as deep as the top section. Do you agree with that? I mean, you can't necessarily see it properly because it's not a very accurate diagram, and it's in 3D, and you're viewing it from slightly above. But I think roughly that is the same depth as that. I will grant you maybe it's a little bit not quite as deep, but not that much. Does anybody disagree? The problem is my depth of my second section is much higher than my depth of the first section. The depth of the first section is 3 squares. The depth of the second section is way more. That's 5 squares. And that can't be. You've got to make sure that this versus this corresponds to this versus this, and it doesn't. So what's the solution? What should I do, Charlotte? The graph is basically right, it's just that this is too long, so what should I do?
Make it shorter.
Just make it shorter, cut it off. There we go. So that's the answer, just this part and this part. Okay, that makes sense because it takes a hell of a lot more to fill the slow section, that's 5 grid squares, than it does to fill the fast section. Is everyone cool with that? That's checking 3. You've got to make sure your section lengths on the horizontal and vertical axis are good. That was supposed to be the same as that. That was supposed to be longer than that, and it is, so it's good now. Now I'll just do one other example, and then I'm going to get you to have a go at some. I'm going to try and do this hard example at the top here. Now, does anyone want to have a gut feeling about how it's going to differ from the graph that I just did? Yeah, Kira?
Would it start off curved?
Would it start off curved? Why?
Because
Are you right there, Maisie? Kira?
because the edge is curved, it gets smaller, and then we're getting smaller again.
Are you saying that because this is curved, the graph should be curved?
Well, maybe, yeah.
I think you might be right for the wrong reason. What makes this straight is not the fact that this is straight. It's something else. Any?
Is it because it gradually gets smaller and bigger? It doesn't go straight?
Say that again.
When you fill in water, it gradually gets bigger. So in the first one, it suddenly went smaller.
Why should the graph of this be curved? Kira is right. It's just she said it for the wrong reason.
It should be curved because it gradually changes.
It gradually changes its capacity. Yeah? This suddenly changes its capacity, right? Thick, 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 suddenly thin, 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 thin. And when it changes from thick, thick, thick to thin, 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 the thick, thick, thick is always equally thick. And when it's thin, the thin, thin, thin is always equally thin, right? Now that's not like this example. This example here, you're going to need a curve. Because every single second that passes, your graph needs to be getting steeper and steeper. Does that make sense? Because it is getting thinner and thinner and thinner as the water moves up. So you're right, this needs a curve, but not because this is curved, but simply because the thickness is changing. Kira, you cool?
Yeah.
Now, does everyone agree that depth looks roughly the same as that depth? Or do you think the top depth is a little bit shorter? A little bit shorter, significantly shorter, or a lot shorter? Is it half as deep? Okay, right. Well, that's important to make my graph realistic. Now, oh, and what do you think about this bit at the end there? It'll be straight. Okay? Right, now this one's quite hard to draw, but I'm going to do my best. And it's okay to mess it up. Don't have to get it right perfectly. The straight section is the easy part. I'm going to do that at the end, and I'm going to make it very steep, because that is quite thin. That is exactly the kind of thing that would squirt you in the face. Okay? Now, do you think that that is equally thin as that? What do you think? Or it's a bit thicker? Can we all be quiet, please, unless we're contributing? I need a view, please. Natalie, what's your view? Is that thicker than that? Let's say what you think I want you to say. I genuinely want to know. You go. Okay, so my graph has got to start out less steep than that. That should do. That's not as steep as that. It's curved. It's getting less steep. Is everyone clear on why it's getting less steep? Because this is now getting thicker as the water moves up. But then it needs like that. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah. Let's just check the section lengths. We judged that this was not as deep as that. That section, the straight section, is 3 grid squares, whereas this is 5 grid squares. Does that seem roughly right? Is that about 3 to 5 ratio? Yeah, it is. Then it's good. So that's the answer. Now hope and pray that's what the textbook had. Oh, okay, I think the textbook's wrong. The textbook's got curved, we had curved. It had straight where we had, but it's clearly steeper than this. I don't think it should be, because you all told me that you thought that that was clearly more spacious than that. So my graph is better. Okay? Or our graph is better, I should say. Okay? Now, I'm always telling people when they're doing the graphs to stick arrows on the end to show that it goes on forever. It doesn't go on forever, so it's perfectly right that that graph just suddenly stops. Okay? Are we good to go, or do you want to see another example? Okay. If you want to see another example, just give me a shout.